The official start of the college track and field season is just a few weeks away, and if you're actually a fan of the sport, then you should already know that some of the best athletes in the world will be hitting the track. That is why some of them are already Olympians. If you were actually paying attention at the games, some of them didn't just show up, they showed out. In the men's 200-meter dash alone, 2 men who were college athletes were in the Olympic final, and both of them represent colleges in the SEC conference. That is why I refer to the SEC as the most well-funded professional track and field league disguised as college athletics. Anyone who actually competes in D1 already knows this. If you want to win a national championship, you probably got to go to the SEC, because from 2016 up until now, only 3 colleges who don't represent the SEC have ever finished in the top 2 spots at the Outdoor Track and Field Championship on either the men's or the women's side. If you are not in the SEC, you're probably not going top 2. For that matter, you probably can't even get recruited to the conference if you're not at least a low 4-star recruit on SCArecruiting.com. And trust me, I would know. I bring all of this up to make it very clear that the SEC conference doesn't just matter. You could argue they're the only conference that actually matters when we're talking about college track and field. And apparently they just made a decision that is about to become a problem for the entire college track and field community. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I don't even blame you, because ESPN and all their friends in the media can't even be bothered to mention track and field by name. They just lump it in with all the other Olympic sports. So until anybody else really cares enough to tell you what's going on out there, I guess you're stuck with me. I'm not going to try and tell the entire story about how we got to the SEC's decision, because all of this is happening because revenue share is now about to become a thing in college athletics. And I'm also aware that some of the things I'm about to tell you are likely going to upset some people, and I'm willing to accept the consequences. Because most people want you to believe that revenue share is a good thing for college athletics. And it just might be for some of the athletes, but like I said, some of them. And I know it was never going to include the track athletes on that list. I've already shared my thoughts on the new scholarship model that the NCAA proposes across all the sports, specifically how that's going to impact track and field. So I'm not going to go back on all of it right now, but if you need a quick recap, here it is. Up until now, the NCAA has only allowed 12.6 scholarships for the men's side in D1 and 18 for the women. Keep in mind, they did not enforce any type of a roster cap for any of the programs across the conferences. Simply put, you could have 50, 60, or even 70 athletes on your roster if you wanted. You just could only give out a certain limit of scholarships. But in the new model, the NCAA is telling all the schools that will opt into the revenue share model, which really isn't all the schools. It's primarily the power conferences and a few of their friends, that they can give out as much scholarship money as they want from now on. The only catch is they have to have a roster cap. And for track and field, they came up with the number of 45 athletes on the team and only 17 on your cross-country roster. That was for both the men and the women's side. But from what I can tell, the SEC didn't like that rule, at least not on the men's side. So they decided to change it. And their new decision is that they're going to cut the roster size down to 35 athletes. And for cross-country, you can only have 10 men on the roster now. The change would likely take effect for the 2025-26 season. So if you are an SEC program that has more than 35 men on your roster right now, you're going to have to change that within the next 9 months. If you don't immediately see the problems with this rule, that's fine. Remember, that's what you have me for, because this is not good for anybody in college track and field, not just the boys in the SEC who are about to get cut from their teams. And that is a shame, because college track and field right now is perhaps more competitive than it's ever been, and the Olympics definitely proved it. But where the future of the NCAA is actually headed right now clearly has no plans on bringing track and field with them. So let's have a very real conversation about what this rule change is going to mean, not just for the SEC, but everybody in college track and field. Because although revenue share for college athletes can potentially be a good thing, there's also a whole lot of bad. And for that matter, things are about to get pretty ugly out there. But if you're new here, I want to say thank you for even making it this far into the video. And I'm Coach Rob, the founder of SCArecruiting.com, where I rank the best track and field recruits across the entire nation. And if anything that I say actually connects with you, it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe But if I don't, just let me know in the comment section because I try to read them all. The only way that I know how to break this down is to address it as 3 separate conversations. First, what does this actually mean for the athletes in the SEC right now? And beyond that, why did the SEC make this rule change to begin with? And lastly, what is this going to mean for everybody else in college track and field? Specifically if you are a recruit right now, to understand what a men's track team in the SEC actually looks like on the roster right now. I'm going to give you 2 examples. One is Arkansas, who's arguably the best cross-country program in that conference. It's why they won the conference championship. And their track team just won the outdoor SEC meet as well in 2024. For cross-country right now, they have 16 men on the roster. So we already know at least 6 would have to get cut going into next season. But the full track and field roster is actually just about at 45. So before this change, they weren't going to have to cut anybody. But now, 10 of y'all gotta go. But they are not the best example, because like I said, there's technically no roster cap for track and field programs up until now. So if you look at a program like Alabama, they have 26 men, I'm not making this up, on their cross-country roster. They only get to keep 10, so more than half of that roster is gonna have to go. On top of that, their outdoor track roster for 2024 was over 55 men. So that means over 20 people have to get off that team. Simply put, a whole bunch of men's track athletes, a whole bunch of talented athletes are about to get cut from SEC programs. These athletes obviously are going to get cut if the coach doesn't think they're one of the best athletes on the team. Otherwise, you just keep them. But the SEC is basically professional track and field. Even a walk-on in the SEC is a low 4-star recruit. So they could have been a scholarship athlete somewhere else in D1. If they want to keep competing in the sport of track and field, assuming they have more eligibility. That's where they're going to end up competing from now on. Stone Smith, who competes as a freshman at Ole Miss, put out a social media post that addresses all of the problems that he immediately sees with enforcing such a big roster cut. I'm not going to recap all of it, but I am going to give you my biggest conclusion from everything that he pointed out. Simply put, the NCAA, specifically when it comes to revenue share, could care less about track and field. Because while they're getting rid of roster spots for track and field, you could argue that they technically added more roster spots to college football. And revenue share was really only about them, just being honest. The fallout from revenue share in D1 was always going to negatively impact anybody who didn't play football or basketball, specifically if you are a man. There's only but so much money to go around. Which brings me to the second conversation. Why the SEC decided to make this change in the first place? Because the 45 athlete limit with no regulation on scholarships, that was just a nice idea that Congress threw out there. They don't really know what's going on in college track and field when they made it. The SEC already dominates college track and field, and they do it in a world where men's programs only have 12.6 scholarships to give out to an entire roster of athletes. More than 2/3 of D1 will not be opting into this model. They're not going to be giving out unlimited scholarships to their athletes. To be real about it, most of the programs in D1 are not fully funded, and some of them are even in the power conferences already. I don't know how to say this part without it coming out harsh, so I'm just going to come out and say it. Under no circumstances were men's track and field programs in the SEC ever going to give out 45 full-ride scholarships to their team if they were already beating the brakes off of everybody else in the NCAA, who was already underfunded under the old system. Why would they spend 2, 3, or even 4 times more money on their scholarships to still end up in the same place? Another way to consider it is like this. If every power conference program fully funded 45 full-ride scholarships, the likelihood that even one athlete on that roster is ever going to score a point in their college career at the NCAA meet, which is why you would want to give a full-ride scholarship to begin with, is under 20%, less than 1 in 5 chance. If you consider that it's very clear on the numbers which athletes are performing better than their teammates, you only really need to give scholarships to the ones who go out there and score points. Like 20% of the team is doing most of the work on the leaderboards. If the amount of 5-star recruits for me to go out and get doesn't change, I don't want to pay more money to get the exact same results. And track and field doesn't make any money for the college athletic department. I'm just calling a spade a spade. It's the reason why some of the biggest D1 track meets, like the Tom Jones Memorial, don't even charge admission for you to come and watch the meet. I'm not making this up. Really hard to make a profit if you don't charge people to show up. Even lowering the roster cap to 35 is not going to solve the biggest problem for most programs. That issue is still going to be, you don't really want to give out that much money. And when you're going into recruiting, and all the students and families think you've got 35 full rides to give out, well, it's going to make it really hard to negotiate with just about anybody. 12.6 scholarships in the old system really wasn't all that much, but it was a decent enough number that you could put on a budget. Remember, some schools didn't even go that far. As of this moment, they have absolutely no reason to spend much more than that. So cutting the roster size down, at the very least, allowed them to stop pretending they were going to spend money. Yet the real question out of all of this is the one that I saved for last. What is this going to mean for the future of college track and field, aside from cutting a whole bunch of athletes from SEC programs right now? Of course I don't know for certain what is about to happen, but I am going to tell you what makes the most sense. First, the SEC is not the only conference that's going to embrace this. I don't see why the other power conferences would not immediately jump on board. Remember, the SEC is basically already winning everything when it comes to college track and field. Maybe not cross country, but certainly for track and field. If the schools that have the most football money, like Texas, Alabama, and Georgia, don't believe they can afford to do 45 athletes on the roster, why would anybody else do it? Because they've got less football money to work with. It is the profits from college football that basically determine the athletic department's entire budget. It's sure enough ain't coming from the track team because they don't have any profit. I don't believe shortening the roster is necessarily a bad thing, because all the athletes who are going to get cut are probably low 4-star recruits at the minimum. That means if they choose to enter the portal, they will get picked up by somebody else in D1 or even a high-level D2 program if they want to. There will be some track and field recruits who are going to have to decommit. It's just the way the numbers are going to work. But just like the athletes hitting the portal, they're going to end up somewhere else, where they're way more of a priority for the coach who's about to get them. If the other power conferences climb aboard to follow the same rules, the same thing's going to happen to their athletes. There'll be a whole bunch of new transfers that hit the portal, and some kids who committed are going to end up somewhere else. If you're a head coach for a smaller D1 program that opted out of the revenue share model, this is actually a really good thing for you, because you do not have a roster cap, and there's a whole bunch of talented athletes who are now scrambling to find where they're going. Even after the roster cuts, the SEC is still likely going to get the majority of the top recruits. For that matter, all the power conferences are going to be doing the same. But a lot of the athletes who no longer get a spot in those conferences will be way better served wherever they're headed in these other ones, because low 4-star recruits have more than enough talent to develop into NCAA championship caliber performers. The only reason it won't happen is if the coach can't give them enough attention. And you can't really blame a head coach for paying attention to the 5 stars ahead of the low 4 stars. It's exactly the same thing I would do if I were the head coach. For the better part of the past decade, the SEC has been running things in college track and field. They have all the national championships to back it up. But now things are about to change. Probably not for the better as far as they're concerned. And if you are a recruit who's going to have to decommit, my heart personally goes out to you. This could be the last major rule change, but to be honest, I personally doubt it. But one thing is for certain, college track and field will never be the same again. And the men competing in the SEC, or more specifically, who will not be competing in that conference, are going to make that very clear real soon. If you actually made it all the way to the end of this video, I do have to admit that thank you doesn't do it justice anymore, because you are a real one. And if you want more from me beyond this video, on SCArecruiting.com, you can get a ton of resources, like my free recruiting guide, online courses, and much more, including the option to meet with me one-on-one, where my specialty is helping you figure out which schools might actually be the best fit for you. And if nothing else, and you really just want to see more content like this, it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe.